Now when you fret, you have a whole group of frets. You'll notice that at one end it says nut end, and then down the end you have two extras. So starting from the nut end, we'll pull off one of these frets. Be careful when you pull them off not to bend the fret, and if it does have some residual glue left from the tape, just make sure you get that off now. You can usually just use your fingers to get that off. Now, when you're hammering, you want to make sure at this point that you have that cradle for the neck to sit into. You certainly do not want to have do a bunch of hammering just being supported by the headstock. You'll definitely break that off. Now just by holding the fret, you'll notice that it has a tang down the very bottom that will fit into that groove, and you'll also notice that the width is plenty long enough so that there's overhang of maybe just under 1/8 of an inch on either side. So with that fret standing up straight, using the plastic end of the hammer, try and get one end to seat. Making sure that it's going in nice and straight. I'm going to come off the rubber pad so that we get a more firm attack. Nice and secure. Point that fret sits very nicely right into the fingerboard. If there's any daylight, that fret needs to be hammered a little bit more. See that fret is sitting nicely on the top of the fingerboard. So we'll progress, get the rest of the frets put in. Okay, at this point we've pretty much finished all of the frets, and they all hammer in about the same. Now there's a couple of things I do want to point out. If you look on the back side, you know, you're at this tang point, and then you have the fingerboard that can be left unsupported. So there's a lot of ways around this. You know, you can come off the end of the bench and make sure that you're hammering there. You can turn this sideways a little bit. You can kind of play around with your bench, or you can make a very simple jig, and it's basically just a cutaway that's just deep enough for that tang to sit into, and now you can be completely supported as you're hammering all of those final frets, and then just work right off the end of your bench, and everything is nice and solid no matter where you're hammering. So just a simple little tip. It's a very simple jig, a primitive jig, but at that point you'll be completely fretted. Now once it's completely fretted, a nice pair of end nippers that will cut these flush. We'll start at one end. We'll just snip these. Remember that these are just nickel, so they shouldn't go flying, but it's pretty soft metal. We'll trim this whole side. Now, once we have these completely trimmed, our next step is going to be to move into the mill file to get these perfectly flush to the side of the fingerboard. Okay, so the first thing we'll do with that mill file is to set it so that the tang is to the back end or the higher frets. You don't want the tang up the other end because you'll end up hitting your headstock. So flip this around and just continue to file until you don't hear anything, and at that point the file is telling you end of those frets are completely flush to the side of the fingerboard. You can hear it at that point. It's moving very quickly by the side of the frets. A little bit more work up this end. Okay, so now you can see that these frets are perfectly flush with the side of the fingerboard. Now normally you would do both sides at the same time, but just so that we can have a comparison, I'm going to move on to the next step. Still using the mill file, we're going to put this on roughly a 30-35 degree angle and pass all the way through all the frets. Don't work on one section here and then another section here, because you'll have 3 different angles. So you want to try and run that mill file the whole length. And what this is doing, this is relieving the sides of the frets so that as you're playing the guitar, you don't have a sharp edge, sharp cut-off edge of the fret under your fingers. And I'm going to sight all the way down the fret, and again I'm just looking for these to be at that roughly 35 to 40 degree angle. Don't go over too far. If you go over too far, you run the risk of having that string that's on the very edge, that high E string, if you're trying to do a bend, that string could actually fall off the end of the fret if it's too far beveled. So again, if you're using that angle we talked about, you should be fine. Now, if you take a block with a little bit of sandpaper, you can follow the work you just did with the file to start dressing the side of the fingerboard and the sides of the frets. That last grit I just used was 220, and then at that point I have some old pads that I've used for this same operation, and I'll basically fold the pad up and just use those on the ends of the fingerboard. Try not to go on the top of the fingerboard, because now you're progressing backward in grit. What you're really trying to do is just kind of dress and polish the ends of those frets on the side of the finger. So at this point you can see that when I run my finger on here, just like I was playing the guitar, I don't really have any sharp edges or sharp feel to the ends of those frets. Now, there may be a little bit of daylight underneath each one of the frets, and because there's a little bit of dust now that has settled into there, into that spot, you could put a drop of CA glue on each one of those and then polish it out just like you did on the inlay pieces, and that way there you've got the same color wood, same color sawdust going into that area of the fingerboard, and you'll never see it. So essentially that takes you through the whole process of what we're going to do on those frets. Still may have some work to level some frets and some things like that, but basically you're going to proceed and do the same thing on the other side.